Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Loeb's joining us today on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 6 minutes after 9 o'clock, we're at 26. Bill Colley as well on Magic Valley this morning. Welcome back.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Normally you're here on the third week, but of course we did a little juggling. So,
Yeah, I was out of town last week, so I could either have done it by phone or push it off a week. It's better to do these things in person. On the phone, it's just very stale and
plus on the
canned
phone,
kind of thing.
yeah. So there's the phone still always has an opportunity of fail in there.
Yeah.
It's not,
And I've heard you do interviews with guests on the phone, and they work okay for getting out information and for putting your point across, but it still sounds very distant. So anyway, it's better to be here in person.
my favorite phone interview of all time was with Victor Davis Hanson, but
Well, he's unlikely to show up in the studio.
yeah, but he's if you think he's not very exciting in public, on the phone it even is a little less. But he was still very good. I asked him at one point. One of his previous books had been endorsed by Max Boot, and I brought up the fact that Max was angry at him, and he very just in that deadpan way says, "Max hasn't been right since he divorced his wife."
Yeah, well, he's a very low-key guy.
Yeah.
Personally.
Hey, we wanted to talk a little bit today about some of the impact on the legal system. A number of things we're going to talk about, but of COVID, we're maybe right off the top because you've got a lot of trials. We talked about this the last time you were here. You've got a lot of trials that are backed up because of all of this throughout the court system all over the country. But Idaho, of course, was one of those reference points. And
Idaho's more backed up than a lot of places.
And so you're going to have to, when we get to a point, there's going to be a really busy stretch with a lot of trials going on next year.
Yes. Once we're allowed to go back into court for trials, we're going to have one after another, just because so many things have been piling up. And, the defendants, obviously, especially those who were in jail, have a right to, a speedy trial. And some of those people have not given up that right to a speedy trial, have not waived it. And so we're going to have, as soon as the Supreme Court allows trials to start again, we're going to have, it's like somebody's going to click a stopwatch and we're going to start. And wherever the speedy trial time was on a given person, it's going to start from that moment. So if he was, awaiting trial for 3 months, then you're going to click the watch and he's going to have 3 months to start his trial and get it over with. And if he'd been in there for 4.5 or 5 months, then it's going to be right quick, that they need to get those trials done. So it's going to be quite a juggling act for the judges to try to get things scheduled, when they need to go. And, for my office, for witnesses, for juries, for law enforcement, it's going to be one after another. And we're going to use, I hate to tell your listeners this, but we're going to use a lot of jurors all at once, one right after another. And so, people need to be aware that this wave is coming. And the alternative, of course, is if people are getting close to that speedy trial deadline, we either need to dismiss that case because the time has run out, or we need to start it all over again and go all the way back to the beginning with either a grand jury or preliminary hearing or whatever. Yeah, it's going to be difficult.
That would mean trying to find some witnesses and track them down again. And
sure, and that, of course, that is a problem as well. I mean, some of these cases we have are getting to be quite old, and so are some of the witnesses. And if their evidence hasn't been preserved either through some kind of an affidavit or deposition or testimony at a preliminary hearing, then that could become a problem too. Most of the ones that are on our radar immediately, even if they're older, those witnesses have been preserved in one way or another. So it's not a huge concern, but still, it's much better to do a trial with actual witnesses who you can find, who are there in the courtroom testifying, than to read their transcripts.
The other part of this is, and I shared with you, I think the link today from the New York State Sheriff's Association, which represents sheriffs in 62 counties.
Right.
And I still know a few of those guys. They haven't all retired yet, people that I knew 15 years ago or so. In fact, one fellow, I've known him for 33 years, I think, 33 years, and he's still the sheriff of his county. So these guys came out with a statement, and they say, look, we're not scientists. We're not making any scientific judgments, but they said some of these rules about Thanksgiving, for instance, are just not enforceable. And we've had similar sentiments all over the country from police chiefs and sheriffs. And on the local level, our sheriff last week said that it would be very difficult for his people to also be writing up citations, and you certainly don't have room to jail them if they get, put in jail for 6 months in violation of an order. And so part of that is that you don't have the time as well at this point with the backup you've already got, the backlog, that you wouldn't really have time to go putting people on trial for what likely would be a misdemeanor anyway, but you wouldn't have time to put 50, 60 people on trial for a mask violation.
We don't have the time, we don't have the space, we don't have the manpower, and maybe as importantly, we don't have the desire to do that. And when we had the initial fairly, tight lockdown at the very beginning, people have gone through this so long, but remember when all the restaurants were closed and you weren't supposed to be out driving around, you weren't supposed to be with people, and you were supposed to have, it was as close to a shutdown, lockdown as we got in Idaho. We had meetings with all of the law enforcement people. They came to my office, and I had the sheriff and the state police and the chiefs of all the local communities. And our goal at that time was not to go out and prosecute people or give them tickets or citations or fines or set them up for trials or any of that, but to just tell people what the law was, tell people what the governor's order said, tell people that this, was something that we were supportive of, in that we wanted people to be safe, we wanted people to avoid infecting other people, and really concentrate on education and urge people to take, precautions themselves rather than have a policeman try to enforce that. I mean, in some of these states where they're telling you how many guests you can have for Thanksgiving and what relationship the guest can have. I mean, you can have 10 guests, but they can't be people from outside of your home, and all of that stuff. And this is what brought upon the New York Sheriff's Association letter, because New York is one of those places where you're not supposed to have anybody who doesn't live in your house for Thanksgiving. There's just no way any law enforcement person is going to want to enforce that, because that puts law enforcement in the position of really making enemies of actual law-abiding good citizens. And police don't like to do that. That undercuts their ability to rely on the support from citizens, when they need it. It turns good people against law enforcement in a way that is dangerous for everybody. And it also, having laws that nobody abides by and that everybody mocks really has a corrosive effect on the whole notion of law. If we pass laws that tell you can't have, dinner with your parents, or where was the place where they were saying, I think it was England. I saw, if it's not England, it's New Zealand or one of those places where, sexual relations between man and wife was, something that was discouraged. I mean, this is just insanity. And if you pass stuff like that, all you do is tell people that the law is no longer relevant in their lives, and they'll just ignore it. And once you start ignoring one, you start ignoring all of them. And that's a slippery slope we don't want to go down. And I don't think that we're close to that in Idaho, but we had 2 mask mandates, discussed recently, one at the city of Twin Falls and one at the health district. And in both cases, they chose not to mandate, meaning make it a crime to not wear a mask. And I think there were a lot of people expressing these kind of sentiments there, that, you just can't pass laws that tell people they can't do really fundamental things. They're just going to ignore it.
I think, though, in many ways, because law enforcement through the spring and summer media was telling us that the public was angry with them. Of course, it was only a fraction of the public, and most people,
Sure.
I think, are still very supportive. But I think the moves made and the explanations made by the chiefs around the country and the sheriffs around the country actually is going to bring the public a little closer to law enforcement. They'll be more cooperative. They'll be more willing to help out. I think that in a way, in the long run, it strengthens that relationship.
Now, are you talking about some of the riot situations or the mask? You know,
The mass
they're
of
two
people around the
different.
country. Yeah.
Okay, because there are two different things right now that are pitting law enforcement against citizens and against the media, and the media against law enforcement. The COVID issues with masks and mask mandates, and enforced social distancing and that sort of thing, and then of course the whole um, you know Floyd kind of stuff, the Black Lives Matter stuff, where um, law enforcement is criticized when they act, to the point where in some cities now they're just standing there and not acting, which of course is another problem that we have. I mean, if law enforcement believes that by doing their jobs they'll be subject to criticism or prosecution or harassment, um, then you're going to have a problem there too. But yeah, I think by and large, law enforcement, which includes prosecutors, don't want to be seen to be, you know, enforcing in a militaristic way the way people choose to live their lives, as long as they're not hurting anybody else, and they're doing things that we rightly believe are our rights to do. I mean, if I want to have my daughter over for Thanksgiving, I just don't think, Governor Cuomo should tell me I can't. And if Governor Cuomo tries to do that, then there's going to be almost universal pushback. And anytime where you get into the position where there's universal pushback against a law, the whole system starts to shake a little bit.
I think that it really was driven home when it was announced that his mother was coming to his house for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, well, of course, some people pass laws to protect the rest of us, but they are wise enough to know that they can violate them.
She's a very sweet woman, by the way.
Sure, she's a nice lady.
But she's 89 years old.
course.
She's in that risk pool.
But I'm sure in this case, every precaution's been taken, and they can be trusted to do it right. Now, if you wanted to have your 89-year-old mother over, I'm sure you would not do that right, and therefore you need to have some help. And you need to have your neighbor encouraged to say, over some kind of like a rat line that, oh, I think his mom's coming to dinner, and then the police should show up. I mean, this is all so crazy.
Matilda, from my experience, by the way, she softened the edges on the harshness of her husband.
Not very well. I mean, I don't know this lady, but I'm not giving her much credit for being an edge softener.
Yeah.
I mean, as I look at the father and the two sons in that family, wow.
Yes.
I mean,
I just know that when I would try to talk to her husband when he was alive, man, he could be a pain. But on the other hand, if I ran into her somewhere and she was just so friendly and conversational, it was like night and day.
Yeah, well, that may be, but you can't give her too much credit for softening the rest of them. Right? That's all I'm saying.
We got a short break. We've got more with Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Loeb's on the way in a few minutes. 20 minutes after 9 o'clock, and we're at 27. Bill Colley 2 on KLIX this morning. And just by the way, I have a note from a writer in your hometown, because they're under a mask mandate, and he's got a question. We'll bring that up after the break. That's on the way in just a few minutes. We have a question for Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Loeb's this morning, and it's 9:23. It is 29. Bill Colley, too, on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Kurt in Pocatello, where they're under a mask mandate. He says they have a 30-day, almost like a grace period, though, where no one gets a citation. But after the 30 days, I guess he's just asking for an opinion on this. Do you think that people will actually start getting tickets and maybe even jailed when that 30 days comes to an end?
Well, without knowing about any commitments or pledges that law enforcement or prosecutors have made there, I mean, it could be they said, we really mean it, we're going to do it. I don't know anything about that. But essentially, I think that the danger of actually getting tickets or citations is fairly low. Unless, like that incident in Meridian with a woman in the park. Unless you just go out of your way to make yourself as obvious as possible, and then when the police show up to say, "Hey, ma'am, you're supposed to wear a mask," or the park is closed in that case, please put a mask on. You know, you're in Smith's, and Smith's has a sign that says they want your mask, and we got a mask ordinance. I mean, if you make a big spectacle of yourself and throw yourself around and yell and say that you're not going to abide by it, then I think, yeah, I think some of those kind of people are going to get cited, because if you throw it in the face of law enforcement like that, you really give them no choice. But absent that, I think if you're violating the mask mandate and a policeman sees it and walks up to you and says, "Hey, you know, sir, you're supposed to be wearing a mask here today," and you say, "Oh, all right then," and you pull a mask out of your pocket and put it on, I think you're not going to get a citation. I can't imagine any police department wanting to do that. But if you say, "Well, you know, to heck with you, I'm not going to wear a mask and there's nothing you can do about it," I think that then you put them in a situation where they have to do something if the law's been passed.
I think, though, that jail time, it's mainly going to be appearance tickets. I don't think it's going to be jail time.
Yes, I mean, to get jail time, there would have to be other things happen. I mean, I doubt that you're going to get arrested and taken to jail. I think you'll get a citation in the case that I just mentioned. I don't think the police are going to arrest you right then, and then you're going to show up for your hearing or your trial, and you're either going to plead guilty or go to trial and be found guilty or not guilty. I doubt that judges are going to issue jail time for those things. I think it's going to be fines and you know, whatever the statute is that they passed in Pocatello. I don't know whether it specifies a minimum fine or just a range of fines. I don't know, but I think almost exclusively we're going to see fines rather than jail.
We have a caller. Caller, you're up next. You're on KLIX with Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Lopes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a problem wearing a mask. I don't like it.
Okay, I think we
lost him.
Yeah.
I'm still here.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I hope we got a really.
Yeah, you might want to turn the radio down.
Sorry.
That'll help. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I thought I had it turned off. I would be curious to know what Grant Lopes might think of the rumors I've heard about mandatory vaccination to get a driver's license.
I haven't heard that one.
I have not, and I really can't comment about it, having not heard it. I know that there is talk about when the vaccine comes out for COVID, that it be mandatory for certain things, like, you know, for going to school, if you're going to put your kids in school. But I have not heard about the driver's license thing. I would have to see how that is written up or what the proposal is. I wouldn't be surprised to see some attempts, and certainly some states that require it for all manner of things. It's hard to speculate, you know, without knowing more about what the caller has heard. And I think, you know, I don't know anybody who likes to wear a mask. I mean, I don't like to wear a mask. You feel all suffocated, and you know, your glasses fog up, and you know, I've heard all kinds of people say, "Well, you can do this and that, and your glasses don't fog up as much." Mine don't fog up the minute I put the thing on. But if I go to a store and the store has a sign that says, "We require you to wear a mask before coming in this store," I'm going to put a mask on, because it's a violation of that store owner's privacy or private property rights for me to walk in there without abiding by their rules. It's another thing entirely to tell me I have to wear a mask when I'm alone in my car, or when I'm, you know, walking outside, or those things. I mean, that there's a stepwise progression from understandable and acceptable precaution to, you know, crazy control over your life. But, you know, I think that if you're out there right now and you don't know that there's a health crisis because of this COVID, and you don't know that people have died from it. You don't know that for some people it's really serious, while for some other people it's almost nothing. Um, if you don't know that by now, you're living, on a desert island somewhere. And I think people just need to be reasonably precautious and respectful of other people. And bringing law enforcement into it and expecting them to batter down your neighbor's door because you saw the 11th person go in there for Thanksgiving, that gets crazy.
Want to thank the caller. I don't have to worry about that license renewal for 7 years and 10 months. So
there you go.
This will be an old story by then. Also, LASIK surgery. I read this the other day. Demand for it way up because of people having glasses fog over.
Is that right?
True story. 9:30. We've got more with Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Loebs on the way. It's 28. Bill Colley 2 at 9:30 on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Loebs joining us this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're up to 30. It is 9:33. Bill Colley 2 on Magic Valley this morning, and the number to reach the prosecutor is 208-736-0300. That is 208-736-0300. We have, we were talking earlier off air about some of the regulations in some of the states around the country, and I think you referenced Kate Brown in Oregon, and they are doing some things there that are going to raise some constitutional red flags when it comes to their mandates and restrictions.
Well, yeah, I mean, what can you say about Oregon? You look at Oregon and you just, I mean, I saw that little thing in one of the news services about the little map that some of the Oregonians want to draw that puts like 3/4 of Oregon and Idaho. And I thought, well, I don't know that we want that. I mean, it's just, there's just so much crazy stuff going over there. I mean, the thing they passed, and this was the voters passed it, to make it okay to have cocaine and heroin and methamphetamine and fentanyl. I mean, that's just crazy stuff. I mean, it's so reckless and so it's going to spill over into Idaho, of course, because they're right on our border. But you just look at some of the things they do over there, like the governor encouraging people to, rat out their neighbors if they see, the 11th person coming to Thanksgiving dinner. And I mean, it's just insane. And it turns people against each other in a way that isn't going to be soon forgotten.
Well, I think of Mrs. Kravitz in the old Bewitched TV series where she was always the busybody. And so if someone turns you in, you're going to want to know who in the neighborhood did it. And then if you find out, someone's going to think, well, okay, I'm going to get them the next time.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things in this country right now for people to, be divided about and hate each other about. To add more fuel to that fire seems really foolish. But, that people get so entrenched in what they believe, and then they believe that they have the right to make other people believe as they do. And that's a formula for a real disaster.
We have a caller. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
A simple question for each of you, and that is, if, let's say, Idaho did impose a limit on the number of people for a holiday dinner, if the police did show up at your house, what if, when you answered the door, you asked them, do you have a search warrant? Could they still come in without a search warrant?
No. And, with assuming it's a misdemeanor, we now have a law in Idaho that tells a policeman that he can't arrest somebody for a misdemeanor that he didn't see. So I guess if you have a policeman that's sitting in the driveway and counting as your first guest arrives and he counts the 11th guest, I guess he could have, visual proof that the law is being violated. But, the caller makes the same point we've essentially been making. I mean, if you get to the point where you expect the police to, barge through doors with battering rams and jackboots and drag good citizens out because they have 11 people around the Thanksgiving table, if we get to that point, there's no turning back. The country's lost. I don't think we're going to get anywhere near that. Even in these states where the governors are saying that that's what they want the police to do, like in New York, it's not going to happen. I mean, the New York sheriffs just pretty much said we're not going to do it, and I just don't see that happening because people won't tolerate it. And if somebody tries to do that, I think we're going to have a major problem on our hands.
Want to thank the caller. In fact, the sheriffs in New York said, who do you ticket? Do you ticket the 11th person
Yeah.
or ask one to leave, or do you ticket all 11 or the homeowner? They said there's no guidance with any of this.
Yeah. And hopefully there never is any case law on it because we don't get enough cases where it gets adjudicated. But yeah, I mean, that's a problem too. I mean, it's just impractical. It's impractical and undesirable. And when you have a law that is both those things, you have a bad law.
We've got about a minute before the break, so we'll get a question out from a caller, and then we can get to that on the other side of the break. Caller, you're on the air with Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Lopes.
Well, good morning. You're on a topic that is not near and dear to my heart. I haven't heard yet about those of us who have respiratory conditions where we have been told by doctors not to wear a mask. And I wonder, because I have seen things already where the public is, I've walked into a couple of places, the public, well, you're not wearing a mask. I can't. I've got a doctor's order that tells me not to. What's going to happen with people like us who are respectful for the law? We don't fire back. We answer honestly, and yet we still get demands put upon us. What's going to happen with us?
Well, we'll get to that after the break. We were actually talking about some of this during the last break off air. Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Lopes with us for another 20 minutes. We're at 28. Bill Colley with you, too, on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're not going to get to anywhere near the amount of things we originally planned to get to today.
The mask for Thanksgiving is
more on the way. Previous caller raised a question about the fact that he's among that group that has been told that for medical reasons not to wear that mask in public, and yet receives some grief for doing it. And there's a story out of Massachusetts. A fellow, he actually harassed two women walking on a rural trail because they weren't wearing masks out of the middle of nowhere. And so, and I was telling Prosecuting Attorney Grant Lopes during one of the previous breaks, I saw a post out of Delaware yesterday where someone was asked to produce their medical excuse, which I think violates HIPAA. Mm-hmm. And so, so the stores can't really ask those questions if you say you've got the condition, whether you're fibbing or not. We're at 9:43. It's 28. Bill Colley, 2 on Magic Valley this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. But he brings up a good point because there's been some violence because of this. But there are people out there for obvious reasons, asthmatics and certain people. They have been told, the mask, you can't wear it. But we start getting into that area where some people believe that they're the law.
Yeah, you get kind of crazy vigilante kind of mood that goes through people. And so when you're shopping at Smith's and you see a person without a mask, there is an element of people who just get all, riled up because that person doesn't have a mask. Well, you have no idea who that person is, why they don't have a mask. So, I mean, my advice is, let it pass because you are ignorant and it's not your job. For the person who has a condition and, if a doctor has told them, boy, this mask thing, I know you want to wear a mask because you want to be safe and all, but you shouldn't because of this condition. You go with what the doctor says, and, you don't have any obligation to tell a stranger in a supermarket or on a trail or wherever the other examples you had were all about your medical conditions and produce, your chart to show why you're not wearing a mask. And we all know that there are going to be people that don't have these conditions who just don't want to wear a mask, who aren't wearing them because they don't want to. And they might say, I've got a medical condition. Well, that's got to be the end of it. If you're telling a lie about it, people should let that lie go, because you're not required to prove to anybody, police or anybody else, what your medical condition is to not wear a mask. So I would advise people who see somebody without a mask to assume that they have a medical condition. And even if you think they don't, it's not your business, you know?
Well, we don't need an Oxbow incident
No.
over somebody not wearing a
We
mask.
don't need people, going to it in the middle of the aisle at the supermarket about somebody wearing a mask and somebody not. Now, if you are one of the people that's not wearing a mask, and if you have a medical condition, maybe you should be a little respectful of the other people, thinking that they are maybe terrified of COVID and terrified of you because you're not wearing a mask. And, wait till they're out of the aisle. Don't cough on them. Don't breathe on them. Don't get close to them. Just, try to be respectful. And many of these things can probably be avoided.
We have another caller. Caller, you're on the air on KLIX at 945. Okay, try again. 208-736-0300. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
Yes, I just had a quick question on making laws mandating the how many people can assemble together, not so much the mask issue, but it's like in houses and all that. And would that law be enforceable when it would, if these people were getting together to have a religious service, or maybe are going to practice speeches or have a speech contest, or putting together something on the press, or just peacefully assemble to petition the government for a redress of grievances? That's right out of the article or Amendment 1. So how would that be addressed? And I'll hang up.
Well, again, it depends where you're talking about. In Idaho, the governor's most recent order exempts all of that. So if you are gathering for some kind of a political purpose, then the rule exempts that. If you're gathering for a religious purpose, the rule exempts that. In some states, some of these governors have specifically not exempted religious gatherings, while it does seem that they have exempted certain political rallies. So, I mean, in Idaho, again, we're always fortunate to be in Idaho. In Idaho, the rule which the governor put out when he announced his stage 2, his stage 2 requirements, the exemption does apply for political and religious purposes. And so again, it becomes very difficult to enforce, right? Because I have 11 people in my house, and the police, let's say they barge in because my neighbor ratted on me. The minute they walk in, I start talking about, how we all need to band together and, send money to Georgia to help the Senate race there. Well, now what do? Now it's a political meeting. And then the police leave and I go back to eating my drumstick. I mean, it all highlights how unenforceable this is, and how what is going on in the rational states and with rational cities and rational health districts is an attempt to impress upon people how important it is to be safe and rational and careful about this. Where they try to enforce it by, the rule of, force with, guns and jail, they go too far, and it becomes, I think, counterproductive.
I have a very funny message from a friend in Teton Valley who says he said he wasn't going to wear a mask because he had asthma, and his wife said, "When did you develop asthma?" And he said, "Last spring." Yeah. That's how a lot of this works. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX with Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Lobes.
Yeah, hello.
Sure, go ahead.
How you doing?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to comment on the mask. The only people I know that have come down with COVID is people that wore masks. And so, I believe what they initially said, the masks make absolutely no difference. These were essential workers that had to wear, for their job, and they were exposed. They got it. Everybody, several in their business got it. They're all wearing masks. It made absolutely no difference. And I don't believe I will ever wear a mask. I don't want to be one of the sheep that goes down the trail with everybody else.
Well, I think on that note, there's no foolproof way. No one's guaranteeing that a mask is going to save you from this, right? The scientists say that it's helpful.
I mean, I think it's true that there have been statements on both sides of this from medical experts. Sometimes they say a mask is important, sometimes they say it's not. Um, and, you know, I don't know exactly what the caller meant by, he's never going to wear a mask, and that's fine. If you don't, you don't. Um, but certainly there are people who have died and who have gotten sick from COVID who are wearing masks, and there are certainly a lot that didn't wear a mask, and there's so many different ways you can come into contact with people who have it and catch it. And I'm certainly not going to say that it's not a serious, potentially fatal illness, especially for vulnerable people. Um, my advice, and again, you don't have to take my advice unless there's a law passed, and in Idaho, in Twin Falls, there's not a mask mandate at the moment. But my advice is just be respectful of other people. If you walk into a store and the store says masks required, put a mask on, because that store owner has the right to have you wear a mask if you come into his store. That's kind of the bottom line on that. I mean, I don't know whether a mask is going to protect you or not. I'm not a scientist, and the scientists seem to be, occasionally all over the map on these things. But it doesn't do me any harm to wear a mask if I go shopping in a store where the store has asked me to wear a mask. I would not be very happy with a law that required me to wear a mask when I was, walking on the Canyon and Rim Trail. And hopefully we never get to the point where we have to talk about that.
Another tongue-in-cheek remark from Brock in Twin Falls, who says, we're going to consider the family Thanksgiving dinner a religious gathering because we give thanks. And another writer mentions her asthma, and she said the mask just simply cuts down on her ability to breathe. So obviously people are aware of all of those reasons and the exceptions too. Justice Alito.
And again, in Idaho, as in Twin Falls anyway, as the law currently stands, all those exceptions are honored. The religious exception, the political exception, the health, it damages your health to wear a mask exception, all those are honored. And again, I'm hoping that we don't get to the point where we have to talk about restrictions that are attempted by law enforcement and legislatures and city governments and governors that go more toward the New York or the Oregon or California restrictions. I hope that we can talk about those as what's happening in those places rather than happening here.
Justice Alito made some remarks a couple of weeks ago where he essentially said that when this is all done, we're going to look back at it and realize a lot of constitutional liberties were trampled.
Yeah, I don't doubt that, and he got a lot of criticism from the media and from some Democrats especially when he made these comments, and it's kind of rare for a Supreme Court justice, sitting or former, to make these kind of comments. And he was other than in opinions issued by the court, but his speech was full of all kinds of opinion about all kinds of things. And I think he was trying to issue a warning to people in government, to legislators and governors, to be very careful in legislating in a crisis. And the reason for that is obvious, and that is when governments legislate in a crisis, they often over-legislate. They often claim there's a national security or a health risk that requires them to temporarily suspend certain other rights. And you have to always be careful when that's happening. And we were talking off air about, in our lifetime, we can think of several incidences like this, and this being the most recent and now obvious one. But, if you go back in the history of this country, there are several times when presidents or Congress or governors even have legislated in a crisis and gone way overboard. And we look back on those times and say, wow, how did we get away with that? Putting Japanese Americans in concentration camps. I mean, okay, we did that because we said it was important for national security. But when we ignore what the nation is based on to protect its security, then we've now protected a nation that is diminished. And so I think we have to be careful, and that's essentially what Alito was saying about that. Be careful how you legislate in a crisis, because the damage that you do now will linger after the crisis is over.
Yeah, and trying to say sorry later on sometimes
Yeah.
just does not help.
Exactly.
And we got about 2 minutes to go. I heard your former professor Jonathan Turley this morning on television. I know we can't really sum this up in 2 minutes, but he and I think Alan Dershowitz the two of them have both said that President Trump has options, but they're really kind of slim options, and he's running the clock's going to run out in a couple of days.
Yeah, the clock's going to run out, and the options are narrowing. And even if the president's people are right and all of these things that they're claiming happened, the point is you have to prove that they happened, and you have to prove that they happened within the period that is available to us, which is not very many days now. I mean, once the Electoral College gets together on the 14th and votes, it's pretty much over. And anything between now and then has to go through a process. I mean, you can't just stand up and say these things happen. You have to prove them, and then they have to be tested in court. I think that the chance of that happening now is diminishing to a very, very small percentage.
Yeah, we're down to, I think, 20 days to the Electoral College vote.
Yeah, and several, of course, of the cases that Trump's team has brought to court have been turned back. And, given the way the vote stands at the moment and the states that have declared that their count is finished, he would have to overturn at least 3 of those states, I think, maybe 4. And I have no doubt that there have been a great many irregularities and a great many fraudulent activities in some of these states, and some that just make no sense. Like, the Pennsylvania one is the most obvious, where they just decided to let ballots come in afterwards, even though their state law said no. But the point is, you've got to prove those things in court to get some kind of, recount or, throw out votes or, count additional votes, whatever. That has to happen before the Electoral College votes, because once they vote, that's it. And there aren't any attractive options after that happens.
We want to thank Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Lopes. Have a happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, thanks, you too, and everybody out there, have a safe and happy Thanksgiving.
And God willing, the creek don't rise. I'll be back here tomorrow morning between 6 and 10 a.m. The Rush Limbaugh program is up next, following the news at 10 o'clock.